I would like to thank Diane Muffson for her lovely article in the newspaper. It has garnered some, some interest in the LLP. And I want to welcome our new members, Mrs. Judy Eplin, Mrs. Becky Mon, Mrs. Becky Hatfield, and Mrs. Beverly Pofall. So thank you all for joining the LLP. And if you're with us, I know Mrs. Pofall is with us and Mrs. Eblin is with us. So thank you for being here. And I want to introduce our speaker, Dr. Frederick H. Walker, who became Rick as Grandpa had Fred cornered, is entering his third career. He became a surgeon at the Johns Hopkins Hospital and practiced for over 40 years. He was one of the first surgeons in the country to perform laparoscopic surgery and did over 5,000 laparoscopic cases. He then became a member of the adjunct faculty at Marshall University teaching human anatomy. He has taught for 7 years. He has become somewhat knowledgeable, but not an expert, about electric vehicles. He has taken online courses in auto mechanics for EV high voltage components only. He is the secretary of the West Virginia Electric Auto Association, WVEAA.org. He lectures widely in the tri-state area on EVs and has made a movie about them, which he will share. And so thank you, Dr. Walker, for joining us and he's one of our own and also being our speaker this morning. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, I have to show everybody now here. Wait a minute now. I am wearing my herd t-shirt.
You are. And I will remind everyone to mute your device so we don't get the unintentional background noise.
So I want to thank you for inviting me. I want to point out to everyone that this is really a fun type of education where you're not going to get tested and you're just satisfying your curiosity. My goal for today is to just have each of you be so curious about one item that you go to Google or you go to YouTube and just learn a little bit more after the lecture is over. Also, this lecture is done a little differently than my school lectures because it is a PowerPoint presentation. But PowerPoint slides have several purposes. The main one is to remind me of what to say. But you don't, some of my slides are busy, but you don't have to read them like you're going to get tested on them. I will pretty much explain what we're going, but also I think Elizabeth will be recording this. If she hadn't hit the record button, she needs to do that and then post it somewhere so you can go back and look. So on my first slide and my last slide, I have some contact information, and anyone who wishes to learn a little bit more about it can certainly do that. We're going to take about 45 or 50 or 55 minutes to get through the slides. If you have questions, either put them in the chat or write them on a little piece of paper and kind of hold them to the end, because we have 30 minutes that we can fill with questions at the end. And already before we started, we had some very good questions. So I'm going to hit share screen, and then I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation here and put it into slide view mode, slideshow mode. All right, so does everybody see a big green slide that says electric vehicles?
Yes.
Okay, we're in the right spot then. I'm not talking to the wrong group. So they clearly will alter the future of transportation, but also that has a tremendous impact. We've seen with COVID how clean the skies can be when we're not polluting so much. Just last night, there was an article about asthma in people that live near where the trucking routes are. And they were saying then once we've got to solve this pollution problem because it's damaging our health. So for our health and for the environment and for your pocketbook, electric vehicles probably are the future. So I want to first also say that some of what I'm going to tell you is not true. How can it be? Well, it was true yesterday, but it's not true today. That's how fast the situation is changing. So I'll mention that again a little bit further. So the future has already begun. That's me parked at the Gillum House Bed and Breakfast in Shinston, Maryland, a little tiny town near Fairmont. And I'm getting a charge and staying overnight so that I can proceed on a journey. Electric vehicles are not new. This vehicle, a model of this, the 1909 Baker, was the first vehicle of any kind parked in the White House. So when Taft was president, Roosevelt loved horses. When Taft became president, He bought this for his wife to drive because it's all electric. It did not have a crank. And this is Jay Leno driving one. Here's at our very own Heritage Farm Museum, an electric truck from 1908. So these are not new concepts. Now we're going to start off here. I'm not going to bore you with terrible formulas. I have 2 formula slides. And all you need to remember is that velocity is how fast you're going, but acceleration, which takes the majority of the energy, is changing your velocity. It's increasing. So increasing from 0 to 30, that's acceleration. Once you're at 30, you're no longer accelerating, but you have a velocity. Then once you want to go from 30 to 60, when you get on the interstate, or 65, then you're using acceleration again. So I want to point out why this is so important in an electric vehicle. Now, as we get going faster and faster, our vehicle of any kind has kinetic energy, the energy of motion. And so when you need to come to a stop, we all need to come to a stop sometime. In a gasoline car, you throw all of that energy out the window, every bit of it. And in an electric car, you don't, you put it back in the gas tank. So these are the only 2 terms you need to understand about electricity. Power is the voltage times the amperage, and we're going to use that later on to talk about how fast can your car charge. That's measured in kilowatts. But the quantity of energy is the kilowatt hour. So if you want 1 kilowatt for an hour, that was the quantity, the number of electrons. You can actually count them out. But that's the quantity of electricity. And we use that to measure the size of our battery. And also when we talk about range, how far can you go? Or mostly you're going to see you can go 4 miles for every kilowatt hour. And then you're going to need to charge up again. So we'll come back to that. 2 items about how we generate power. Every power station uses something, usually heat, but sometimes water flow from gravity, to spin a coil of wire within a magnetic field. That spinning generates a flow of electric current, and they send it to our house. That's simple. In an electric vehicle, we have what's called a motor generator. So that means the motor has a coil of wire, which is inside a stationary set of magnets, and that rotator is attached to the wheels. When we send an electric current into that wire, it makes a magnetic field. So maybe the point right up here at the top is magnetized, and now this rotor wants to get over to it purely from magnetic attraction. Now, as soon as it gets past, then it changes the field and it's repelling it. And the combination of those magnetic fields produce the motion of the rotor. But when the current is shut off, the coil is still spinning. And now it becomes exactly like a power station. It's generating electricity, and we put it back in the battery. When you do that, it slows the car down. It slows it down not because there's friction, but because the magnetic fields are reversed. And so when I hit I don't hit the brakes in my car. When I put on the regenerative braking, it's like a big giant magnet is behind me, like Roadrunner's behind the coyote with a big magnet on the back of his car and just pulls me to a stop. But also, until I come to the stop, those tires are spinning. They're spinning the rotor, and that's creating energy that I put back into the battery. 85% of what I spent to get to where I'm going, I'm putting back in the battery when I'm coasting. So let's talk about the 4 types of vehicles that are available today. One's an internal combustion engine, gasoline or diesel. One is called a hybrid. A hybrid vehicle is not truly an electric vehicle, and I'll show you why on the next slide. And then you have 2 vehicles that plug in. The plug-in hybrid, that's very different from a hybrid. And the battery electric vehicle, which is what I own. I don't have any gas engine at all. And so this group is also called a ZEV, and that means zero emission. There's no exhaust. All these others do have exhaust. So because of the small amount of power that the hybrid vehicle gets from electricity, it doesn't get to keep that name. So it's only the other 2, and they're termed PEVs, and those are plug-in electric vehicles. So those two BEVs and PHEVs together are termed PEVs. So let's talk about each one of these. An internal combustion engine is by its nature only about 20% efficient. Now imagine you go to the gas station and you put $25 worth of gas in your car. Only $5 worth moved you down the road until the next fill up. The other $20 you threw out the window, and you threw it out as heat. Now, obviously, the radiator cools fluid and cools the engine. The exhaust puts off a lot of heat. You put your hand behind that, it's hot. When you squeeze the brakes to stop, you're changing kinetic energy into heat, and you dissipate that or throw it away. A gasoline car is much noisier, and that noise is created by using up the energy that you put in your gas tank. Also, an electric vehicle is very smooth, but an internal combustion engine has some vibrations. And so that energy that created the vibrations is energy lost. It's not pushing you down the road. So as you know, modern cars frequently show you how many miles per gallon you're getting instantaneously. And boy, when you start at that stoplight, you're getting 1 mile per gallon. Then it goes up to 2. Now, eventually it gets up to maybe 30, but the average is only about 25. So that's what they call the EPA, the estimated, the EPA rating for your mileage. So a gasoline vehicle gets pretty poor miles per gallon once it gets to above 45, and boy, you get above 70 when you're really pushing a lot of air out of the way. And that's true for the electric car too. But in this case, you're wasting even more of that energy that you put in the gas tank. So somebody had this bright idea. Actually, it wasn't Toyota, but Toyota was the first commercially successful hybrid car. And they said, well, let's just put a tiny motor and a tiny battery and just use that to get us up to 25 miles an hour. And then we'll click in the gasoline engine. And it worked. Now, what they really did was, how do you transition from the electric to the gasoline? And they were wonderful at that. And the Prius is truly a wonderful car. You're going to see different battery sizes from 1 to over 100. And so the Prius and other hybrids are usually 1.4 to 1.6 kilowatt hours. That's the volume of energy in the battery. And the first two versions of the Prius were nickel metal hydride batteries. And then in the third and the fourth versions, they switched to lithium ion. So all hybrid vehicles have 2 electric motors. And you say, why do they have a second one? Well, if you look down on this slide, the second one is actually the starter motor for the internal combustion engine. So it uses electricity, and some of them only, totally silent till 20. Most of them start the gas engine earlier, and some of them start the gas engine all at once, but they idle it until you need it. So it uses only the internal combustion. Once you get above 30, you are no longer using any of your electric motor at all. Now, you do capture some of that, and it doesn't take very long to put it back into the battery, but most of your gasoline car after above 30 miles an hour. What happened, though, is we, and some of us here are above the same age group, remember when cars got 16 to 20 miles a gallon. So when the Prius came out and suddenly said, now you can get 40 miles or 36 miles per gallon, man, that was wonderful, especially in 1974, when the gasoline prices were out the roof, as they have done several times since then. So here's a couple other hybrids, the Honda Insight, the Ford Fusion. But just an interesting fact that I just learned about a month ago in researching for this, the introduction of hybrid vehicles did not reduce emissions. Because it was so much cheaper to drive, people drove a lot more miles. Hey, I'm getting 42 miles a gallon. But what they did was they drove more than they were used to before. And so the overall emissions were higher than they were before the introduction of hybrid vehicles. Now, hopefully by now, people aren't going out and driving, especially in COVID, right? Just because they get good miles per gallon. But the overall effect back in 1997, when the Prius was introduced, was an overall worsening of smog. So then someone said, well, let's put in a little bit larger battery, and now we're going to have a different concept. We do have two motors, just like before. There's multiple configurations of when you use one and the other, but they often run solely electric until the battery's almost depleted, and then they switch over to gasoline. So Jay Leno, who we showed you earlier, bought one of the first Chevrolet Volts with a V, and he drove for a year and never bought any gasoline because he never drove more than 50 miles in a day, and he drove slowly enough that he didn't have to kick in. He was in LA, of course you drive slowly. He didn't use any gasoline at all in a year. So these are very economical if you can run them as a commuter car. Just go, and then you have the backup, which I'm going to show you in a minute, is not wonderful. But if you're just driving 50 miles, and I'll show you why 50 miles is a magic number. And here's some other plug-in hybrids. The Chevy Volt was one of the first. And just 2 years ago, Toyota jumped on the bandwagon and created the Prius Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid. You also can get minivans. You can get SUVs. So 4 years ago, when I bought my Chevrolet Bolt with a B, there were about 10 models to choose from. In 2018, there were 20. In 2019, there were 40. This year, 2020, there's 80. And next year, there's going to be 160. Now, you don't have to remember much of your high school algebra to see that that's growing what they call exponentially. There are now over 160, maybe more, electric vehicles. I know there's more of that you can buy now in the world, but some of them in China are not sold here. And there's, in fact, some European electric vehicles that are not even sold in the United States. So in the United States, we'll have access to maybe 160 vehicles next year. This brings us to the last, the battery electric vehicle. An electric motor is about 80 to 85% efficient. We now have to have a larger battery, between 40 and 100 kilowatt hours. There's no car right now that has more than 100, but next year there will be. My car has a 60 kilowatt hour battery. So if you look down there and you see, well, the average is 4 miles per kilowatt hour, I can drive, and if I drive in a fairly normal fashion, I don't have to slow down or creep, I can go 240 miles. Now, the battery electric vehicles may have more than one motor, but they're all MG1. When we have two motors, we put one in the front wheels and one in the back. Several, not a huge number, have one in the front and two motors in the back. And some of the trucks put a motor, not an engine, a motor on every single wheel. So there's ranges you can go in a battery electric vehicle. Once they got to 100, well, that was better than 50. 200 was considered the magic number because that's about how far it was to a charging station, and because I can fill my car overnight if it's a 200-mile range, i.e. a 60 or 50 kilowatt hour battery. I'm going to show you in a minute why that can be charged overnight in one night. So there's no emissions, and these, of course, have a much greater recapturing of the energy of motion to put back into the battery. This is the most important slide in the talk. The internal combustion engine vehicle can cost you as much as 25 cents every mile to drive it. And a battery electric vehicle can cost, I'm actually at about 2 cents per mile to drive. So that's more than a 10 times saving, not a 10%. I drive for 1/10 the cost of most people that have a gasoline car. Now, obviously, there's no gas, but there's also no oil, no antifreeze. I don't wear out my brake pads because I almost never step on the brakes to stop. I reverse the electricity with a little paddle, and it brings me to a stop, and I never squeeze the brake pad. So I wasn't creating much heat to do that and wasting it, and I also didn't wear out my brake pads. Some of the powertrains, because there's only 20 moving parts, my car only has 18 moving parts in the entire drivetrain. There's no gears, there's no transmission. There is a reduction gear. The motor's spinning very rapidly for efficiency. And so there's a reduction gear that then I put that to my wheels. But that ratio is the same no matter what speed I'm going. It's just how much electricity am I feeding to the motor. So we now have powertrains and batteries that are certified for 1 million miles. The 22nd of this month is Battery Day, which is Elon Musk's latest reveal for the new batteries that the Tesla will use. And that battery is purported, we don't know yet, will have a 1 million mile certification. Go to the next slide. This is one that put out by a group called Clean Technica. And I don't know if you can see my cursor. I think you can because you're sharing mine. A lot of energy is used from well to tank in a gasoline car. I mean, you have to haul that gasoline up and over the mountains to get to Marlinton, West Virginia. There's no pipeline. And even when there are pipelines, as we well know, that can be a disaster. So you only have 44% of the energy left, and now you lose 70% of it. 80 is probably more likely, but they're being conservative. So you're only 13% efficient. My vehicle uses almost none to get it here, and my car is 90%, they said. I made it conservative at 80, but 90% efficient. So my overall efficiency of any electric vehicle is about 73%. And that beats 13 every day. Well, where is it going? There's over, now this is a slide, it's not true, but it was true 3 months ago when I made it. There's over 7 million plug-in cars in the world. China has the most. They have over 200 companies making electric vehicles and over 200 companies making the chargers that people put in their garage if they need one to charge their vehicle. So China's way ahead of us, as is Europe. So here's a market, just 1 year snapshot in 2019, the last one we have full year sales, obviously. And there were 1.21 million cars in China sold, electric and BEVs and PHEVs, almost 5% of all of their car sales. We were about 2%, but that's kind of a magic number because at that point is where the takeoff is going to be more exponential. So we should be maybe not catching up to China, but we'll certainly be at 5% sales per year easily within another 2 years. So there's over 60 models today, 30 brands, soon double that, and many from companies that are never going to make a gasoline car, only going to make battery electric. So you all know these names, or most of them. You certainly know Audi and BMW, Chevrolet. You can't name a car that's sold in the United States that doesn't have either a plug-in hybrid or a battery. Now, some of these you haven't heard of, maybe like Coda and Arcimoto, and let's see, most of Smart, yeah, but most of those we know, and they all have a car available today. These are the ones that are going to have one probably by the end of next year. Yes, Apple's going to make a car, as is Sony, the music maker. They're making an electric vehicle, but they're never going to sell it. And I'll go into that another day if you like. But Aptera, look at that, Lamborghini. I mean, we all knew that name growing up, and they're going to make an electric car. So these are all electric cars that will soon be on the market. This group of 7 here, and now we can add Sony to that, are only making autonomous vehicles. So they're making ones that the driver does not need to drive it. So they're doing research in this, and autonomous will have its use. It will never fill our entire market. It's not meant for that. It's only meant for, ride sharing is a good idea. Within Huntington, an electric vehicle could memorize the routes just within that city. And if it took the same exact route every day, it could be within 6 inches of the curb when it wanted to be, but only for that one route through from Barbersville down into Marshall University. So coming to the last part of our talk is how do you charge your plug-in electric vehicle? Well, all the EVs, and including the hybrids, have 2 direct current batteries. One you're familiar with, you all have it in your car, a 12-volt battery. And that's called an accessory battery. It runs the radio, the lights, the seats, the fans. Now, an electric vehicle also runs a computer because it controls access to this high voltage battery. Now, the high voltage battery has several functions, one of which is to move the car. Okay, that's obvious. But it also has to do some heating and cooling functions. We have to heat the cabin. And how does a gasoline car do it? Well, it's spewing that exhaust. So we simply surround it with a little compartment and blow air through that compartment into the cabin when we want heat. But you often have to wait till the gasoline engine warms up before you can warm up the cabin. But lithium-ion batteries want to be most optimal. Now, the range in which they work is huge, but the range in which they're optimal is a little smaller. So we can't let it get too terribly cold or too terribly hot. So we use that high voltage battery to both heat the battery and to cool it when we need to. And we cool the cabin. The air conditioner compressor is an electric motor rather than one run by pulleys and belts. The third thing it has to do is to keep these high voltage modules, and there's 9 of them in an electric car. We're not going to go into them, but the battery's one, the motor's one. We'll mention maybe 1 or 2 of the others. But it keeps them cool if they get hot in their job of, saying, converting 120 volts to 400 volts. It gets a little warm, and so we have to cool that module. And then lastly, I have this low voltage battery, which we keep charged with an alternator or a generator in a gasoline car, but there is no gasoline engine in a BEV. And so you use the large battery to keep the small battery charged all the time. And it works. All electric vehicles made can be plugged into 110 volt alternating current and charge. And they do that with a module called an OBCM, which first changes alternating current to direct current, and then transforms that 120 or 240 up to 400 volts or something higher than the battery operating voltage and charges the battery. Now, most of the battery electric vehicles that are charged today, now those that go more than 200 miles, they want to be able to drive to Columbus and go to Baltimore, which I do frequently. Well, you can't charge at home and get to Baltimore. So you have to be able to charge on the road. I don't want to wait 24 hours to charge. So here's where we have these 400 to 1,000 volt direct current chargers, just like gas stations, spread about them. I'll show you how you find them. And most electric vehicles now, the BEVs, but not the PHEVs, are able to do direct current fast charging. And sometimes you can fill your car from empty to full in 1 hour. So we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there's some kind of a device that has to sit between the electric supply and the electric vehicle, and that's called the electric vehicle supply equipment. So what this does is make sure that the vehicle is properly grounded, not through the rubber tires, but back through the source. It says to the EV, what's the maximum current you can take? I mean, what are your wires set for? What are your circuit breakers set for? And so the EV has to talk to the EVSE and say, well, I can accept, 19 kilowatts of power. And the EVSE knows what to do with that. When I'm charging direct current in my car, I can accept a maximum of 55 kilovolts. And so the EVSE, the machine that's standing there in the parking lot, asks the car, hey, what kind of a car are you? How much can you take? And there's even some new things now, because up to now you've had to use either an RFID card or an app on your phone to start it. What if you're not where there's good cell phone signal and you can't start the station? But every vehicle has a VIN, a vehicle identification number. So they're starting to put that in the communication only for the direct current now, not the fast chargers, and say, okay, charge up, we'll send you a bill. And that's how they know who to send the bill to. It's automatic. It also says to the car, how full are you? Because if you really only need 10%, I'm going to give it to you at a different rate. Now, we'll talk about this in a minute, but I'll give you the analogy now. If you're putting olives back in the jar Those first few are easy. They fall to the bottom. But the last few takes a little more energy to fill them in. And the same thing with your battery. If your battery's 10% full, I can fill at my maximum rate until about 55%. And then I'm no longer maximum. I've got to cut down a little bit because it's creating too much heat to shove those electrons in. And we're going to see how most of these direct current stations have several step downs. So the EVSE says, well, how full are you? And then lastly, tell me how hot is your battery? Because if you're already hot, I got to give it to you a little slower. If it's already 95 degrees, and this is where the Nissan Leaf got into trouble, because they said, hey, when it's 95, you're going to have the air conditioning on, right? Yep. Well, then we'll just take some of that air conditioning air and blow it across the top of the battery. Didn't work. The battery saw about a 5% loss in its total capacity every year. So in 20 years, it no longer was any good. So Tesla, among its 1,000 other wonderful things they did, said, we're going to liquid cool the battery. So Chevy said, that's a good idea. We're going to liquid cool ours. And so those two vehicles have been out the longest, have seen under 1% per year. So our batteries will last 100 years before they're no good. So the EVSE says to the car, what's the temperature? The Society of Automotive Engineers in the United States said, we're going to have to set up some standards because anybody can't just go out and say, this is an electric vehicle charger. It's like UL, right? It's going to blow up your car. So they made these standards, the physical, what temperature, can it work in the rain? Yep, they can. And they did this for both AC and DC. And they also said, well, you're going to plug into the vehicle to the EVSE. We're going to tell you where to put those pins so that everybody can use the same plug. That's almost true, but not quite. So this is the plug pin pattern of my car. The top two are the hot wires. The bottom middle is the ground, and the two small are the communication wires. Now this is a Tesla plug. They have two at the top, and the ground is at the middle and the bottom, and those other two little dimples, there is a wire in there for the communication. So the SAE said, well, we're going to put these EVSEs into 4 groups based on whether they're AC or DC and how fast they're going to be able to give it to you. So as I said before, each EV tells the EVSE what it can accept. So here's those 4 levels. And remember, voltage times amperage is kilowatts. So AC level 1, that's 110 volts. Just plug in your garage. It works. And you'll get about 5 miles of driving for every hour you plug in. But guess what? If you only drove 50 miles in a day, you're completely full the next day. You're not deficit whatsoever. AC level 2 is 240 volts. And now I can charge about 25 miles for every hour I'm plugged in. Since I'm usually not plugged in for 10 hours a day at home. At work, I'm not plugged in either, not yet. But sometimes at Marshall, we will be very soon. And so we can also get electricity there. But at home, I'm at least 10 hours. And I only need 8 hours to fill my car. So I'm good. But then on the highway, you have these 2 levels. The DC level 1 is up to 48 kilowatts, but the lowest EVSE out there is 24. DC level 2 goes up to 400 kilowatts, but the highest of any station is 350. And the highest of any car that can accept is 250, but next year there will be 350. So they're going to be ahead of the curve by being able to have the standards govern up to 400. So here's AC level 1 charging, 120 volts. Now, if I'm on a 15 amp circuit, which we all have many of them in our home, this can run continuously at 80% of the rated. So if it's a 15 amp circuit with a 15 amp breaker, I can run at 12 amps. And 12 amps times 120 is 1.44 kilowatts. And that puts 5 range miles, driving miles, for every hour that I'm plugged in, called a charging hour. Range miles per charging hour. Excuse me, I got to get my voice moistened there. So to put 200 miles in your car would be 40 hours. So you say, well, that's no good. I can't wait. No, you don't ever have to. You just simply drive less than 50 miles in a day and you're good. Can you drive more? Yes. But then the next day you may have to park a little bit, plug in a little bit longer. And I'm going to show you where you want to do that or you have to do that. An 8 amp is, you can also tell it the EVSE. I don't want to take quite so much because the TV's on the same circuit. Or my wife's doing some sanding in the garage and she needs 7 of those amps, so only give me 8. The AC electricity is converted to DC, transformed and put into the battery. And in AC level 1 charging, that level remains the same because it doesn't heat up the battery very much. So you have no degradation with AC level 1 charging. Well, we said commuters can use it. They're fine, 50 miles, they can fill up every night, just like Jay Leno did. But how about that airport long-term parking? By definition, you're there 3 days. You're flying to Memphis. You're going to stay for a couple of days and come back. Your car is going to be there for 72 hours. You don't need anything more than 110. How about the college students? I was talking to one of my students the other day. She says, I drive my car about twice a week. I go about 20 miles each time, and all the rest of the time it's sitting in the parking. I said, and you don't need a big charger. You just need a plug. And if in 48 hours, you can fill every single EV that's out there. Lastly, remember I said the battery doesn't like to be too cold. So when I leave home for my 7-mile drive to Marshall, I'm going to have to drive 7 miles back. And I got 20 miles. I'm great. I'm good. So I go there. I park in the garage where it's 18 degrees out. So I get out and get in my car and it says, oh, you only have 6 miles you can drive. Now, what do you mean? I know I've got 14 miles in the back. Oh yeah, but you can't get them out because it's too cold. So all you need to do is plug in at 110, not for the mileage. I'm just keeping my battery in a range, where a temperature range, where I can get all of those miles back out of the battery. Now, all EVs use the same outlet in the wall, and they use up to 2 vehicle plugs. And we have an adapter at this level. We made adapters so that a plug that is not the same as our car, we can change. And I'll show you that picture in just a minute. And you can use an extension cord. So when I go to my sister's house in Michigan, I just run an extension cord from her garage out to where my car is, and I can use that for AC level 1 charging. There's your outlet. Everybody has that. This is my EVSE. That's you see the plug. Everybody knows what that plug is that plugs in the wall. And the other one is that 5 pins that I showed you the pattern of. That's called the J1772 standard. Well, how about AC level 2 charging? Well, now we're up to 240 volts. Most people have 240 in their house. You run a dryer, you run your range on 240. So you can just run another circuit, usually from your service entrance, and get a 30 or 32 amp or a 40 amp circuit. And this is the various EVSEs that are sold. There's a 16, I have a 30 amp myself. Now, most of them are 32. And you can see that in 8 hours, which is what you sleep, you fill your car. But mine takes 8.4. But I plug it in about 9 o'clock at night, and I really don't care if it's finished at 4:30 in the morning instead of 3:12. So it doesn't matter. So you can get by with a cheaper, if you need a faster one, you can get by with a 30 amp, which is what I bought, being a poor college professor. Well, what are the uses? This is for home charging. Often you install the EVSE, you buy it. I bought mine at Home Depot. I put it in myself. It's also destination charging. So when you go to a hotel, a motel, a bed and breakfast, every state park lodge, thanks to Kelly Bragg and others, have electric vehicle chargers of AC level 2. Every single one of them. If they have a lodge, they have an electric vehicle charger. But we also have hundreds of RV parks and hundreds of KOA campgrounds for RVs. And every single one of those has a NEMA 1450 plug. I'll show you a picture. Most of the EVSE have that plug on the back end. So you can go to any RV park in the state, plug in. And I've gone to many of them. And I've said, what if I'm in deep trouble? What do I have to pay to come in and charge for an hour? You know what they all said? Nothing. Just if you're in trouble, come in. You can have 50 cents worth of electricity for the good nature of our KOA campground. Every place, never had a place say, no, you can't come in. And so we buy an adapter, even at this level now, there are adapters at the 240 level. Above that, not so much, but the 240 voltage, we have adapters. So that's the plug, the NEMA 1450 plug. The two big gold plates get the high voltage. It's 240 between those two. Between a gold and a silver is 120, and that's what the RV needs. Some things run on 120 and others at 240. And the one at the top is the grounding pin. This is my adapter. The one on the left, the black there, accepts a Tesla plug, and the one on the right is the plug that my vehicle needs. And at level 2, AC level 2, we have those adapters. Now, all of the cars in the United States have either a Tesla plug or the J1772, even the cars that were made in Japan, even the cars in Europe have that. But at a higher level, now the Japanese cars introduced a third, actually they were first, they introduced a different standard of pins, and I'll show you that. So there's mine looks like that, 240 volts, 88 to 90% of charging is done right in your garage, if you have a garage or carport. These can be outside. Here's one that can be out in the rain. This is a Clipper Creek charger. This is a 32 amp charger. So now let's talk for the last 5 minutes here about direct current fast charging. There's two levels. We mentioned those before. And I try to be a little humorous here. DC level 1 is faster than AC level 2, but not by much. So we sometimes call that DC slow charge. There is no term, I made that up. But DC fast charge is what both of those levels are called, DCFC, and you'll see that term a lot. You won't see DCSC, but if you're expecting to get 55 kilowatts and you're only going to get 25, that can put a crimp in your travel plans. So you need to know the level of the charger at the station where you're going to stop and charge up. So here we have the big voltages. Wow, 300 at a minimum. 80 amps, 24 kilowatts, that's the lowest level, up to 400 kilowatts. Like I said, we have no cars or even EVSEs that do that now, but the standards are set. But how fast you charge depends upon your car. Says, well, what's your max? It depends on the station. Is it a 25 kilowatt or is it a 150 kilowatt? It depends on how far your battery's charged and its temperature. So let's look at that just a little bit. This is a slide I got from a friend of mine. You can ignore the big red and blue lines. What I want to show you is the step downs. You see at the bottom of the graph, I'll put my cursor down there, at about 52%, it says, oh, I'm starting to get a little back pressure shoving those electrons in. So instead of being at, over here, 50 kilowatts, I'm going to drop you down to, 30. So there's 5 step downs in this to protect the battery. And when you get down here, it's so slow, you might as well know, if you can get to another EVSE within that mile. So let's say you charge to 80%, right? Here's 80. If you can get to the next EVSE, get off of this one and go to the next one. But sometimes, like when I go to Toledo, I can get to Columbus, and then I can get to Columbus to Toledo on a single charge, but I have to sit in Columbus until I'm 100% charged, or I can't make it to Toledo. Now we're fixing that, but we haven't fixed it everywhere. So this is called the step down of the DC fast charge. Now Tesla, 2 years ago, said, oh, you're going to charge much faster than you did before. And they said, oh, you put in bigger wires? They said, no, we just simply told the computer, what's your temperature? They said, well, we're a little hot, but we're not too bad. They said, well, keep up at this level for a little while longer. And at each one of these levels, they're out a little bit further. And so the Tesla charges faster, not because its max rate is faster, but because its step downs were extended. So here's a typical 50 kilowatt. This is what I would get onto. I want to add 200 miles. I add 90 of those in the first 30 minutes. Next half hour, not so much. Next half hour. And look at this. At 30 minutes, I got 5 miles. That's 10 miles in an hour. So you almost never, ever sit there for 2.5 hours. to get you 200 miles. You go on to the next station. Well, what is this good for? It's good for traveling. And here's a principle. You always try to do something useful. And I put useful in quotes, but to me, taking a nap can be useful at my age. But I always try to stop and eat or drink, go to the restroom, stretch my legs, walk around a little bit. And you don't have to stay with your car while it's charging. It will send you a text message when it's full. Or say, give me a call when you're 80% filled, and it'll send you, my phone will buzz, and I'll say, oh, I'm 80% filled. Let's go unplug for the next person. We try not to arrive at less than 10% because we're anxious. We are not anxious that we're not going to get there. Every single EV gives you so much more information than a gasoline car to tell you how much further you're going to be able to go. And if it's really close, you just slow down and get there easily. The anxiety is that all the stations will be blocked by other EVs, or worse, by gasoline cars that just out of spite will park in an EV slot. Now, we have 2 chargers at Marshall University. I'm the one that donated those to the university. And 90% of the time when I go by, I can't plug in because there's a gasoline vehicle parked in that space, and that's called being iced. So we need to pass rules and laws that say, if I parked in front of a gas pump and didn't let people get to it, I guarantee the police would be there in 5 minutes, and in 10 minutes, I'd have a ticket in my pocket. We don't do that for blocking an electric charger. So we almost never go to full because that's wasting time. We plan our rest stops for a meal and convenience or do a little shopping. But also there are people who have no ability to charge at home. And so they're dependent on level 2 commercial and DC fast charge. As an acquaintance of mine, not a friend, he's in California, and 100% of his charging is DCFC because he doesn't even have a plug at home to plug into. Many people live in an apartment, don't have a plug. So now we have these 3 non-interchangeable plugs: Tesla supercharger, CHAdeMO or CHAdeMO, however you want to pronounce it, it's okay. And the CCS, which stands for Combined Charging System. What that means is I'm going to take the plug that I used for the AC charging, I'm going to add 2 more pins, and now I can use that combo plug. There is one adapter. Tesla gives their vehicles a CHAdeMO adapter. But there's many different DC fast charge speeds. We saw that. Many different brands. And you do have to pay for this. You're not going to get it for free most places. So there's the Tesla pin pattern. That's actually a European pattern. That's not the one I showed you in the other one. That's the Tesla European pattern. The middle one is called the CHAdeMO pattern. And they've got the 2 big ones, number 5 and 6, for the high voltage. And then the others are communication and grounding. Number 3 is not used. Number 4 is actually the grounding plug. And over here on the right, you know the ones on the top, that's the 1772. The 2 biggest ones up here at the top are the electricity. This is the ground, and the other 2 are communication. And these 2 are for when I have to use direct current above 50 amps. Well, how do we get that word CHAdeMO? It's an abbreviation of charge to move, meaning, yeah, you got to charge to move your car. But the name, interestingly and humorously to me, came from the phrase "ochadimo ikagadasuka," which means, let's get a cup of tea. Because that's about all the time it's going to take to charge your car. Is enough to have a leisurely cup of tea or a bowl of soup at Zoop. So another factor to Tesla owners, although they're given a CHAdeMO adapter, the power is limited to only 50 kilowatts, when if they go to their own superstation, they'll get 250. So they don't want to stop at the CHAdeMO unless it's absolutely an emergency. But I can't do that. There's no adapter from a CHAdeMO to my plug. So this is a typical DC level 1. That's my reflection in there. I'm charging in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I'm at about 43% filled. I'm still running at 348 volts and 98 amps. And I got 27 minutes to go to be full. Very helpful. But now here's Electrify America. Now, very briefly, I'll tell you that, and you may know, Volkswagen cheated on their diesel emissions, a fact which was picked up by scientists at West Virginia University. And they got a $900 million penalty for hurting people's lungs and telling it that it was much cleaner than it was. So some of that has to go, all of it has to go to cleaning the air. Now, yes, some of it's going to go to making a school bus that's a hybrid, but many of it, much of that money is going to go here to these charging stations. And Electrify America is always 150 or 350. And you see banks of them like you do at the bottom there. There's 8 of them in that station. I only got 7 in the picture, but there's bunches of them most places. Well, here's the different companies that make those chargers. I think there's 11 of them on that line. And they all have a map to show you where they are. But you think Charge Hub's going to show you where the EVgo charger is? Not a chance. So this is ChargePoint's plug. Now, if we were live, I would show you this. As you zoom in, let's look up here at where's Columbus, Ohio? Right here, 412. As you get closer, that breaks down into other stations until you eventually get down to 2 or 3 or 4, however many there are at that location. And the green arc here tells you how many of them are open to charge right now. So as you get closer and closer, you may find, well, there's 4 plugs, but they all have a white ring around it, so none of them are open. Now, some of the newer apps here will tell you how many minutes until the next plug will be open. That's assuming that you can either stop in Maysville, Ohio, or Findlay, Ohio, or Toledo, Ohio, any of those choices. But I'm going to show you in West Virginia, we don't have very many choices. So here's Tesla map. This was out of date the week after I printed it, because they have many more, and they add so many every week that it has to be an app. If you print it out, it's no good a week later. Electrify America just announced a month ago that there are now 2 routes from California to the east where you're always in range of one of their chargers. Now there's 2 north-south routes also. There's a Miami to Boston, and there's also a Miami to Chicago route where you're going to be able to be within a charger. But a lot of it, look at Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota. And EA hasn't, because there's just not that many people there. So hooray for PlugShare. PlugShare was started when there were no charging stations out there and you had to plug into someone's garage. And so they said, well, we'll make a little map and say, yes, I will allow you to plug into my garage for 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever you want, overnight if you want to, but I'm not going to let you sleep in the bedroom. And that was called PlugShare. So PlugShare has a map. This is just a portion of it. This is West Virginia. And it shows the green are the AC level 2, and the orange or tan are the DC fast charges. But remember, DC fast charge Tesla doesn't help me. Oh, so let's filter out the Tesla plugs. Whoops. That's what it looks like. There's not one charger in our entire state of West Virginia, DC fast charger, that I can charge my car in. So I live in Huntington, most of you probably do, and I can drive to Charleston, Beckley, and I just barely can make it to this one. But guess what? It went out decommissioned a year ago, and I can't make it to Stanton. So I'm really hurting. I have to go up here to Clarksburg and stay overnight. I stay overnight at either, here's Blackwater Falls, right there below Oakland. Right up here near Philippi is Tigert Valley. And right up here near Fairmont is Shinston. So all those places I can get a room and stay overnight, but I don't really want to be able to get to the next charger, which is in Hagerstown. So anyway, I thank you very much for doing this. We have lots of time for questions. This of course will be in the printed or the recorded. So that's my 2 email addresses. The West Virginia Electric Auto Association has a website and also a Facebook group page. And if you're just thinking or just want a little background info, just go in there and just lurk and look around and see what other people are posting and get educated, because my guess is that within 2 to 5 years, almost everybody here will be driving an electric car. So I think I have one more slide, do I? Oh yeah, this is that movie that I made for Earth Day. It's made by Marshall University, although I'm the star of the show. Right? Don't tell my mom that, she'd like it. So anyway, it's on YouTube, and you don't have to write this down. You can get back on the recording and go to the very last bit of it. find the white slide and get that recording. I should have copied it and then pasted it in the chat box, but it's about 18 minutes long, and it uses my vehicle to show you all the things we've been talking about. How do we charge it? How do you see how much miles you have left when you're sitting in the driver's seat? All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and put us back on picture. So now I'm here along with everybody else, and I'll be happy to answer some questions. Took us exactly 53 minutes, so we're in good shape.
So I'll start with the questions. Do you think that all vehicles at some point in the near future will be electric?
They certainly will not be autonomous. I think that 95 to 98% will be. There's probably some that aren't. I'll tell you, there's an electric vehicle right now that is used every day, never has to be plugged in to charge, ever. And you say, how is that? Well, it's an ore carrier, and it carries 40 tons of ore off the mountaintop. So it has enough energy to get to the top of the mountain, and they put 40 tons of ore in, and now it reclaims or recaptures enough energy, taking it to the train cars at the bottom, that it turns right around and goes back up, and it never has to be plugged in. There are some ferries out in Puget Sound that run that 15 miles across, and just in the time that it takes to unload the cars and load the next batch, they plug in and charge. And so, yes, there's many ways in which, many areas in which the electric is just going to absolutely take over. Now, I'm looking for Dr. Gilbert, said, they're 1/10 as much? Yeah. Well, guess what? We have this little thing called a pandemic, and we don't have as many students coming. We're hurting for money. How can we save money? He said, well, do you own some vehicles? And we have a whole fleet of 145 vehicles that Marshall owns. I said, well, let me look into how much we would save if we gradually, over a 10-year period, put in those. Now, you don't need a charger for every vehicle. You maybe only need 5 of them at the physical plant, and you can charge all 40 vehicles that they have for the whole year, maybe three chargers. So that's what I'm doing, is looking into how much we could save. But my guess is the savings is going to be fairly substantial. Now, we can't afford to do it all at once. That's a $6 million enterprise to replace all 140 vehicles. When one wears out, we need to buy a new one. And here's another reason, I should mention this before. This is a sentinel year for buying an EV, because cars that were made in 2017 were leased. People said, well, I don't know if I want it. Guess what? They loved it. I'm never, ever going back. But the technology is so much better now. I'm trading in my old Chevy Bolt or my BMW, and I'm going to get a newer vehicle. So over 100,000 vehicles went on sale as used EVs. You can get my car, which cost about $40,000 brand new, get the exact same car for under $20,000 now.
Wow.
So there's a whole used EV market that only opened up this year, and next year will probably be even bigger. So as of right now, the average electric vehicle is less expensive than the average gasoline. We made that about April or May of this year. We turned that over, and it's never going to go back because the electric vehicle costs go down. You know how much a Tesla costs, right? $85,000. Well, they reduced by 10% every Tesla S and X model that they sell. It's 10% less than what it was because they're making so many of them. So there are lots of electric vehicles between the 15 and 40,000 range. Yes, there's some that are 150,000, but that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the get me to work. I mean, my car has 5 seats. They're all heated, wonderful trunks. I have 3 trunks. And a roof rack if I need it. So I can do anything with my car that you can do with any other SUV that's out there. But that's, there are going to be lots of new EVs. And I think, to answer your question, that it will probably peak out at about 90 to 95%. And I think it'll do it within 10 years. I probably won't be here to see it, but you all will, and it'll happen. Guarantee it.
Even the bigger cars, the people that like their bigger SUVs?
Yes, even that. I mean, even now you can get huge pickup trucks that are bigger than a Ford F-350 and run for 1/20th of the cost.
Wow.
So there are a lot of luxury sedans. So Polestar is coming out with one. As I said, Lamborghini has one. There's going to be a whole lot of really luxury vehicles, but there's also a slew load of $30,000 to $40,000 vehicles.
You said the batteries last a long time, and we probably would outlive, or they would outlive us. But what about other repairs? Are there other repairs that crop up on these vehicles?
It of course can have your turn signal doesn't work like it did, but I've spent zero on repairs in my car for 3 years, zero. And most electric vehicles are zero. They don't cost anything at all, except if you can rotate the tires. And Judy, you and I probably don't do that, but we pay $14 twice a year to have them rotate. That's it. That's a total maintenance expense, except when I run out of washer fluid. So now another thing happened about 3 years ago. Solar is taking off, and solar is wonderful. The sun shines, you got power. What happens when it's a cloudy day? Oh, that's right. I better have a place to store that power when it was sunny to use at night. So the guys that had those Nissan batteries said, you know, our battery can't do 400 volts anymore. So somebody said, well, can it still do 120? I said, oh yeah. Well, how long can it do 120? Now, maybe 20 more years. So all the solar companies buying up the used electric vehicle batteries, repackaging them into something called solar storage unit. So there is a market for the used batteries from an electric vehicle to be put into solar storage. But that is a good question. But you know, my car, even as a used car with virtually no maintenance, my car is depreciated only because for the same price, you can get a much fancier one now. But it's not depreciated because it's worn out. It's just never going to wear out.
Is tire wear pretty much just like any car?
No, a good question. Very good question. Tire wear is a little worse. Now, the reason it's worse is I have my maximum torque at 0 RPMs, just as I'm starting. So I can beat any car off the line. I can beat a police car. Now, he'll catch me by a quarter mile and I'll have a ticket in the next quarter mile, but I can beat him off the line. I was with a friend of mine in his Tesla, and we went out to lunch, and then we were going to go. He said, let's take the interstate home. I said, sure. So it was just one interchange. This is over in the Eastern Panhandle. And so we got to the on-ramp, and he comes to a stop. I'm like, why are you stopping? You're on the on-ramp. But there's nobody behind him. He says, are you ready? And I knew what he meant. I pressed my head against the half of the seat. And before we entered the interstate, 102 miles an hour. So in less than a quarter of a mile, he quickly slowed right back down to 70 because that was the speed limit. But that's how fast these cars can go. So you can imagine that this does wear out your tires a little bit faster. So instead of maybe lasting now I've got the original tires on, I'm up to 36,000 miles, but I probably am about ready to make a change. So maybe 40,000 instead of 50,000, but that's a very good question.
Most power plants now use fossil fuels. Has anybody figured in the cost of generating the electricity that goes into your car and adding it to the other costs?
There's a number of ways to do that. And the question, if some of you didn't all hear it, is talking about the cost of the electricity, and is that in fact going down or up? In West Virginia, we pay about 11 cents per kilowatt hour, and we don't have time of use adjustments. Now in California, they're 14 in the morning, but they're 28 in the afternoon. So they have time of use metering. So they actually will set their vehicle, the rate goes down at 11. I'm plugging in you now, it's 9 o'clock, but don't start charging yet. Don't charge till that. My wife and I have always kept fairly accurate statistics of where we spend our money. And so we knew what we spent for gas. The year before, we spent about $2,000 for gas. And after we bought it, we spent $200 more than we did in electricity. So that's exactly that 1/10 cost. Now we'll go places now and we'll drive somewhere where we're together. And we used to just take turns driving so that we sort of each kept a car. So she said, let's take your car. Why should I spend 20 cents a mile when I could spend 2 cents a mile? I said, yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense to spend 20 cents a mile. So for all of you out there who are throwing away 75% of your fuel bill is just going out the window, why not switch to electricity? If you have a garage, if you have a place to plug in, there's just almost no reason now that you should be. And most of us are not, I don't take that long trip to Baltimore more than twice a year. So all the rest of my driving is right here. And I come home at night and I plug in once a week. During COVID, I plug in once every 2 weeks and I drive that 240 miles. And so I don't even have to go. And if I go to visit my sister in Michigan, I always stop in Columbus, partially because that's where I run out of juice, but they give you the DC fast charge for free. And the reason they do that is, what does everybody do when they stop? They all eat. So the 5 restaurants at that mall got together and said, well, we'll pitch in that $100,000 or $80,000 to put in the charger. We'll split the cost. We'll put in $20,000 a piece. And I'll bet you each one of them made more than $20,000 within the first year of having that. Because now that on PlugShare, you say it's there, there's more than one plug, it's totally free, you're going to go to Eastern Gateway. And so the restaurants there made a fortune. Now I pitched the bill to Huntington Mall, Barboursville Mall, they weren't interested. And I went to Tanyard Station. You know, most of that cost of that $100,000 is digging the trench underneath the concrete. That's very expensive. So Tanyard Station was all mud, a monster mud field. So I called up Marcus Nidifer and I said, hey, this is the time. You don't even have to put the charger in. Just put a pipe, a 4-inch PVC pipe, running from where the electricity comes in to where you want that charger eventually to be. And then when the time comes, you don't have to dig up the concrete. You already made it. Just put 5 plastic ropes through there. And then each time you want to put a new charger, pull the wire through with the rope, hook up your charger, and you'll save $100,000. They weren't interested.
Wow.
So it's really, and I went to GoMart. GoMart has a lot of fuel stations here, and all of them have a place to eat. So I went to the chairman of the board of GoMart, and I said, listen, you can be a leader, not just in gas and diesel, but in electricity. Put in 2 of these chargers at every one of your GoMart stations, and you'll make that back within, 3 years. They weren't interested. So people, they're just interested in what I can get now. And I'll run into that problem in presenting to the Board of Governors. I mean, I have to say these vehicles last 20 years. You can have a long-term plan for the acquisition. We don't have to spend that $6 million all at once, but we'll do it slowly. And if we do it slow enough, we'll almost pay for the difference, not the car, not the vehicle, but the difference between buying a gasoline F-250 and a Bollinger B1 is going to be maybe $10,000 more for the Bollinger. But you're going to get that back in 3 years of not paying gasoline. So that's a pretty good investment. And I think that, and that's why we at the Electric Auto Association do these talks, to just educate people. I hope that every one of you learned at least one fact that you just didn't know before, and learn a little bit more about it. It's a wonderful, it's very exciting. It really is.
I guess I always
I
thought.
have a question, Elizabeth.
You're good.
Dr. Walker, hello. This
Hello.
is Bert. We go to church together at Pea Ridge United Methodist, so we've had an electric car discussion before. But I was interested in your comment about the 2 stations you donated to Marshall, and I thought that was wonderful. Do you really think kids or students park there to block the use of electricity, or just because they're desperate for a parking place?
That's a good question. The answer is students almost never do it. Why? Because they don't get their diploma if they have a parking ticket, but it's people that work there. They just park there at Corbley Lot and they say it's open, so I might as well just park there.
Well, and I was registrar for a long time, and students do get their diploma if they have a parking ticket. So that's kind of a misnomer, but
Well, we
that's
don't tell
okay.
most of the students
That's
that.
okay.
Yeah.
That Corbley lot, though, Bert and Dr. Walker, I've seen that. And does it say violators will be ticketed? You have to be electric vehicle parking only. I mean, should there be better signage there? Like
Well,
a little
there
more
needs to be
straightforward?
better enforcement of the signage is what we need, but this is a national, if not an international problem. And there's all kinds of cones and barriers and things. We just have to educate people that they're blocking somebody who may need that charge to get home. Now, Corbley, I'll tell you another story. Corbley was chosen simply because it was close to the hall. We only had a 20-foot underground that we had to dig up.
Yeah, it's
So
easy.
it was going to be about $3,000 for the chargers and about $3,000 to hook them up. So we got the bill from the electrician, $9,900. And so I said to them, I said to the people I was working with on this project, let's get another bid. They said, oh, we can't. We have a contract with this electrical company that if it's under 10,000, if the project is under $10,000, there's no competitive bidding. We have to use them. So naturally, they made it $9,990. They were $10 under, and we had to pay that. And we just threw away $6,000 because we did. So we're not going to do that again. We're going to make sure that our bid for activity is worth more than 10, and then we'll shop around for who can do it. And maybe some of it we can even do in-house. Like I said, I put in my own myself, and we at the Electric Auto Association give advice to people. It's not hard to run a 240 volt. You just have to follow the code, and then you're golden. It's safe. But you're right. We'll look. I think the next two spaces we're looking are in the stadium lot at the other end of campus, and also in the behind the engineering building for level 2. But then to put in level 1, simply an outlet, and have people plug in their own plug into it, both of the garages, the 6th Avenue and the 3rd Avenue garage, we need a bank of about 6 plugs, just 110 volt plugs, and not in a good parking space. Put them up on the roof where I don't mind coming down those steps. If you're going to give me 12 cents worth of electricity, I'll walk the stairs. But if you put it down in the bottom level, and that's what places like, Walmart has gotten big into this, but initially they were putting them real close to the store and they were just getting blocked. So they put them out in the parking lot now. But they put in, Electrify America puts in at a minimum of 8 plugs at every station. So they only have to dig underneath there once, and then they can do that. But that's where some of this cost is. You can save money if you plan ahead.
Dr. Walker,
One quick clarification. I said students could get their diploma. They can get their diploma, but they can't get a transcript because a diploma is a service they've already earned. We can withhold future services, so they can't get a transcript, which is, we all know, is much more valuable than a diploma.
Yeah, we just need to get the policeman to put some tickets on them. Steve, you had a question.
yeah, Dr. Walker, I'm used to getting in the car occasionally and driving to Florida. And, I look at it as a 2-day trip. Can I do that with one of these cars or not?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're my age and you're not going to drive 16 hours in a day, you're going to do an 8-hour day. So you drive for 4 hours, which I can drive at, maybe 5 hours before I have to stop. So I drive for 4, stop for lunch, eat, drive on to my next, and you can plan this all ahead of time. You look on I put all these apps on my phone, so I know exactly where the next church is. And I calculate on a long trip what I call the buffer. Well, I've got 180 miles to go, but I got 210. So that means I have a 30-mile buffer. And I just if that starts to creep down, then I just back off 2 miles an hour. And now it's up to 29. Now it's up to 30. My wife and I left Snowshoe to come home to Huntington, and that's a 200-mile trip. And we had 200 miles, that was all, in the tank. And when we got home, we still had 120 of those miles left because it's 3,500 feet down to 500 feet. So we gained, well, by the time we got to the bottom of Snowshoe Mountain, we gained 20 miles of driving. So yes, you can go to Florida, and there's plenty of, now you have to go over to Interstate 81 and then get on down. But most other states, especially the eastern states, they're well populated with a lot of charging stations.
Speaking of charging stations, what about Huntington? I know that the McDonald's on Fifth Avenue put them in when they remodeled, but how many other places have good-sized charging stations in town?
Yeah, a lot. The Nissan place has, now this is all AC level 2, but every Hampton Inn in West Virginia said, we're going to put them in at our place if you come with us, electric vehicle. So the Hampton Inn and by Barboursville, by Cracker Barrel, they've got 4 of them on the side of the, or 3 or 4 of them on the back wall. So you can look on these apps and find out, where they are. So we must have 18 or 20 of them in Huntington. Well, I thank you very much for the opportunity to share the morning with you. And I hope that some of you learned a little, but more importantly, just got a little curiosity and want to go learn a little bit more. And I appreciate Elizabeth's invitation. And I hope that you all, if you have any questions, please contact me through either of those 2 emails, and I'll get right back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. It was a hugely informative presentation. I learned a lot about electric vehicles. I guess I had the misnomer that once you started driving it, it would just keep recharging itself and you could just go for miles and miles. But it sounds like after so many hours, you've got to actually plug in.
Yeah, you can't, except for the ore carrier, there's no perpetual motion. We used God's invention of gravity to take a heavy load down a hill and put it back in the battery. But yeah, you do have to charge and plug in. But it's amazing how easy it is to just adapt your whole idea. Now, I have a sister-in-law who's a cancer survivor, wonderfully grateful for that. But when I bought the vehicle, there were many times that I had to just take her to the hospital in the middle of the night. And so I frequently plugged in and made sure that I had enough charge to be able to do. So you can always plug in. I can plug in every night if I want to. I just simply don't. I only have to plug in once a week.
And when you plug in at home, do you see a difference on your electric bill? Does it draw much?
We went up $200 for the year when I bought the electric car, and the gasoline expense went down $2,000.
So it clearly outweighs the cost of gasoline versus the electric you're using.
Yeah,
definitely.
I have one more question. I find going to buy a gasoline powered car daunting with all the, models and everything to look at. And this would be even more daunting to me since it's completely new.
Mm-hmm.
Are there people that you can get to go shopping with you, for instance?
Well,
or advice?
If everybody here has a computer and you can get on YouTube, and there must be 80 YouTube channels just for electric vehicles. So if you're thinking about one, or maybe you just want to generalize one, I drive 200 miles a week. So if you know what your driving habits are, you can probably contact us at the owner association. We say, well, there's about 8 vehicles. Then you get on YouTube and look at the review of those. What was good? What was bad? What did people like? BMW had a very interesting concept. They have an electric vehicle called the i3, and they put a little teeny tiny gasoline and like a lawnmower engine in there, which doesn't run the car, but it runs a generator. What do you think the biggest electric vehicle in the United States is? We've had them for a long time. Locomotive. A locomotive is an electric vehicle. It just burns diesel, not to turn the wheels, but to run the generator. So that's what BMW did, put a little teeny tiny generator and called a range extender, but they could get 80 more miles. The problem was they could only get 120 on the size battery they had. And you have to have maintenance of that. Those things go bad because of timing, and everybody has to get their lawnmower fixed up eventually. So there's a lot of EVs out there, and you can educate yourself on YouTube and Google and just learn all about it for 6 months before you decide to buy. All righty. Well, I'll look forward to seeing you all in next month. And again, I thank you very much for letting me share it with you.
Yes, and I want to give a quick little plug for next month. We have Dr. Mufson's going to speak to us about vaccines, maybe not the COVID vaccine. Dr. Mufson, do you have a little sneak peek, a little teaser for our audience this morning?
Well, I will give you some information at the status of the COVID vaccines. none will be available for general use, I think, until the end of the year or early January.
Okay.
So we'll talk about the flu vaccine, which is a very important vaccine that everyone should get, and a number of other vaccines for adults.
Okay, well, we look forward to next month with Dr. Muffson. And if anyone else has anything else to say, any other comments or concerns or questions in general before we log off?
Thanks, Dr. Walker.
Thank you very much. Very